Word and words, O God, help us to hear the one among the many. Amen. We have two major Christian festivals during the year. One is Christmas and one is Easter. In this Christmas season, we celebrate what we call the Incarnation. This very strange idea that somehow we find divinity incarnate in human flesh. For 2,000 years, people have been debating what that actually means. But it's significant that in the Christmas celebration, the incarnation happens not with an adult human, but in an infant, in a child. You might say that the themes of Christmas are pretty mature, but the images are very much focused around a human being in their earliest stages of life. It turns out that the grown-up Jesus will also place centrality of focus on children in his own ministry. There are the moments when he tells the disciples, "Let the children come to me," when they're otherwise trying to keep them away. There are those moments when Jesus beckons us to become like children in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. There is a strong emphasis in the Christian tradition, not only on raising up children in the tradition so that they can become good Christian adults, but also on children themselves as a locus of spiritual insight and inspiration. Our child George, our youngest, he'll be 4 in February, recently gave a lesson on how to be Spider-Man. He pulled out the kid-sized chalkboard and a piece of chalk, and in rudimentary drawings, he began to sketch out for us the 3 necessary components of being Spider-Man. 1, you must have webs. 2, you must have spidey senses. And 3, you must have spidey smarts. Around the same time, at dinner one day, he remarked, seemingly out of the blue, that love is part of being human. And then he said, all humans have love powers. Now, I know I'm a little biased, but if that is not a moment of spiritual insight, I don't know what else to call it. And it's not just that I notice this among my own children. If you're paying attention, children have these kinds of insights fairly frequently. Partly because in the earliest stages of life, their job is to figure out what it means to be human, what it means to live a life, what it means to be kind and to share, what it means to be angry and to fight. children are having experiences for the first time, sometimes on a daily basis. And in this newness, they bring a curiosity that tends to be one of the hallmarks of childhood. Unless because of some circumstance or disadvantage in their upbringing, curiosity is squelched. Most children are curious by nature. Today, I'd like for us to think a little bit about curiosity as one of the powers of love. Love can help us to be curious about another. And when we are curious, it helps us to love. In fact, the great teachers of Zen Buddhism instruct their students of the importance of cultivating what they call beginner's mind, or approaching every situation as if you are encountering it for the first time, like a child. The late Shunryu Suzuki wrote about this concept of beginner's mind, or what the Zen Buddhists call shoshin, saying, if your mind is empty, it is open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. In our gospel story today, at the beginning of the story of Joseph's own experience of Christ's birth, it's interesting, isn't it, the way that Matthew narrates this. The birth of the Christ unfolded like this, and then immediately goes to tell about Joseph. There's no narrative in there like Luke's about the actual birth of the baby. Matthew is focusing on Joseph, perhaps because what is required of Joseph is in some ways more culturally demanding even than what's requested of Mary. In the honor of the and shame culture of the first century, to marry someone who was with child out of wedlock would have brought shame and social disgrace on Joseph. Certainly on Mary too, but to be quite frank, women didn't have that much social status to lose in the first place. There are some indications in early Christian writings that Mary became pregnant based on some indiscretion or violation with a Roman soldier. By beginning his birth narrative this way, Matthew is directly taking on this rumor. And in that honor and shame culture, the right thing to do would have been for Joseph to dismiss Mary, to refuse to carry forward with the marital arrangement. The gospel is careful to say that Joseph wanted to do this as quietly as possible to reduce the amount of public disgrace that it brought on Mary. That's what he thought would have been the righteous thing. Now, it's probably too much to say that Joseph in this situation is a model of curiosity. It's more like the angel comes to him, refusing to let him continue living on in his conception of what is righteous. But to his credit, when he takes on new information from this divine messenger, he's able to adapt and do a different thing. The thing that Joseph thinks a righteous man would do turns out is not what is called for in this situation. Joseph agrees to continue with the marriage, abiding by all the cultural norms about marital relations, doing everything he can not only to avoid shaming Mary in the public eye, but to actually love and nurture this new child as his own. There is a lot of brain science to support the fact that curiosity and openness to new ideas can short-circuit our natural tendencies toward fear and judgment. Two postures that often obstruct our capacity to love others well and to imagine a more loving and vibrant way of being. And curiosity is a love power that is worth cultivating in all sorts of relationships. Romantic partnerships and marriages, parenting, friendship, with colleagues at work, even and maybe especially within our faith communities. We have this tendency to be curious about people that we meet when they are new to us. And that habit of leaning in and asking questions sort of fades over time. There's that saying that familiarity breeds contempt. Not always, but it can contribute to a kind of complacency, a sort of thinking that we know each other and forgetting to wonder about who it is that we are endeavoring to love. To ask anew, who are you? What is important to you? What are your hopes? What are your fears? What helps you to thrive and to feel loved and accepted? If you've been in a long-term relationship of any type and you've practiced this kind of curious inquiry with your beloved, whether it was a romance or a friendship or a parent-child relationship, you've probably experienced the deeper levels of intimacy and connection and growth you can experience with that kind of basic spiritual practice. It slows things down. It takes time. But the reality is that all of us are always evolving. Another one of the insights of the Zen tradition is that we are never the same people 2 days in a row. Minute to minute, hour to hour. We are always evolving and becoming new. We're also in a world that is changing at a pace that is really hard for even the most adventurous of us to keep up with. Curiosity is becoming increasingly a survival mechanism. Even in this transitional period of our church's life, our ability to be curious with each other and our future is essential for moving forward together. These questions that we've been wrestling with about who are we and who are our neighbors, what is God calling us to do, depends on an active cultivation of curiosity. Growing as a church and incorporating new members is ultimately a function of how curious we can become about new folks. And not even just who they are, but about what they have to teach us and how they might enrich our congregation. To be curious is to wonder honestly about what is working and what needs a little tweak and what it will take for all of us to thrive. We have a lot of neurodiversity in my family. On both sides of the family, in our nuclear family and extended family. If you're not familiar with that term, it has to do with ADHD and autism spectrum. These things that used to have sort of stigmatized labels, or they were only thought of in particularly rigidly defined ways. We think about autism, you typically picture that character from Rain Man who has brilliant facility with numbers, but maybe not so great with social skills. Turns out the spectrum of neurodiversity is just that. If you have a neurodiverse child, pretty quickly you realize that you need to throw out some of the assumptions about what good parenting looks like. The notion that everyone should be seated at all times at dinner, not going to work. What I'm saying to you is that this practice of leaning in and being curious, of assuming that not everyone needs the same thing to thrive, that not everyone even needs the same thing to feel loved and appreciated, is one of the core spiritual practices that I think we need to all be cultivating in these rapidly changing times. It can be kind of tiring to cultivate that mindset all the time. In fact, part of growing up into adulthood is sort of adopting patterns and ways of being that help us to use shorthand and not always have to recreate the real, so to speak, in every situation. Of course, we can't dispense of those principles entirely. But this Christmas season, I invite you into a deeper practice of curiosity. And perhaps the best way is to begin with your own self. To ask yourself these questions. Who am I? What's important to me? What are my hopes? What are my fears? What helps me to thrive and to feel loved and accepted? Where in my own life can I reach out in new ways and cultivate new patterns that help me to feel known and seen and loved? So that when you are called upon to exercise your love powers, the innate love powers that you have all been gifted with as humans, your own love tank is full enough so that you have something to give and to offer into the world. May it be so. Amen.